A very warm welcome to IDFC First Bank presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 14, co-powered by Star Health Insurance. I'm Ritwika Gupta, and tonight we are bringing you highlights from our inaugural Season 14 Springboard here in the city of Mumbai. Now, for the longest time, Mumbai has stood at the heart of India's economic growth, bringing together entrepreneurs, investors and industry leaders like no other city. Today, we'll be taking a closer look at what makes Mumbai the undisputed financial and business capital. On the show tonight, we are bringing you a fireside chat featuring Vedant Lamba, founder Mainstreet, on how to create a disruptive brand from a young age. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. Vedant, welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow, and this is our inaugural Springboard for Season 14. The session is titled Building Before 30, and the reason why we, titled this is because a lot of, founders whom we speak to on Leaders of Tomorrow, we are seeing the age, they start a company, it's just becoming younger and younger, and it's very fascinating. I think we have interviewed founders, who are like 14 years of age to 15 to 16, and that's where I want to start this conversation from, because I understand you also started Mainstreet when you were perhaps in your teens, right? And tell me, what was going through your mind at that time? Did you know what you were getting into?
When I was significantly younger, I feel like I had the privilege of my parents protecting this sort of innocence in my heart, which I feel like, as we age, the world kind of beats out of you. And very early on, my mom kept harping on how valuable it is to stay innocent in a world that is so corrupt. And I think that innocence translated very well because my dad was in finance and things like that. And when I'd hear him talk about business, and the excitement was so raw, and I knew very, very early that this is all I wanted from life, was to build something large. And, I read so many stories about what it means to dream. I really want to protect that energy of being able to dream without any sort of boundaries. And I really wanted my life to be like that. And so I kind of just took the plunge. It was, I want to build something, let's just do it. And I put it on the internet, and I made videos, and I tried a dozen different business ideas before I landed on Mainstreet. And actually tomorrow we're launching what is, I feel like the culmination of, my life's work so far, and what I think will be the next big chapter of what we're doing. And it's been a very exciting time.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. And just talk to us a little bit about Mainstreet. Why did you want to start a brand like that? Because when we talk about sneakers, of course, right now they are viewed as collectibles, status symbols, and at the same time even investment pieces. But for the longest time, sneakers were just shoes especially for people in India. How do you think that has changed over the years?
Yeah, no, it was very interesting for me because I never really, I was never raised on buying expensive things. So when I sort of landed on this culture on the internet, for those who don't know, there's a whole world of footwear that was being released in limited quantities because of a special feature set or a creative collaboration with an artist or a celebrity that would then sell out in seconds almost, and then sell at a real premium. They were kind of shoes were releasing like IPOs. Mm-hmm. And there was this culture that started almost, I'd say it started developing in the late 90s and started maturing in the late sort of 2000 teens. And when I learned about this culture and I looked around, it just seemed like there was none of it in India. And it seemed very natural to me that, I'd say India is the OG, status-driven society. We've always been hype about status. So it just seemed very natural that it would find its way here one way or another. And so it seemed like an opportunity to build. And so we started with actually just making videos about shoes on YouTube. And then that sort of evolved into this footwear trading platform that I once envisioned would be like a stock trading platform for shoes. I once envisioned we'd have ETFs for limited edition sneakers and all kinds of things. But it was a very interesting culture that then sort of naturally evolved into this store that we have. And it's a category of business we call cool commerce, where we basically sell anything that's cool today, because I'd say our strength is in understanding and curating taste for our generation and generations above and below us as well.
Right. So you started making videos about footwear on YouTube. A lot of founders, they pick up a hobby and they turn it into a business, right? And then it hits them that, okay, this is a serious business. What was that moment for you when you realized that, okay, this is getting serious? It is actually giving birth to what you just mentioned, cool commerce.
Yeah, it was, actually I had the opposite approach. I always wanted to build something big, and I never really had footwear as a hobby. Until I hadn't bought any shoes for myself till a couple. These are new. I just started buying shoes for myself. But yeah, I mean, the thought process for me was always to try and build something big. I think the market size to build in limited edition sneakers is definitely capped. But I think our first moment of like, damn, this can be big was just around the lockdown. We had signed our first store property in Bandra on Perry Cross Road. And I had borrowed money to sort of put down the deposit and pay the first month's rent and planned the launch for, it was, I think, my 21st birthday. And my 21st birthday coincidentally happened to be very widely celebrated across the country. It was the first day of the national lockdown. And so I found myself in this Uber taxi on the way back to Pune, wondering what the hell I'm going to do with my life and how I'm going to pay rent. And then, I remember February of 2020, we had sold something like 10 lakh rupees worth of shoes totally. And I spent the next 2 months at home in Pune with my family and just sort of selling shoes on Instagram. I had 2 employees, and all of us were just sort of on the Instagram DM, posting stories and selling shoes. And in May 2020, we sold 70 lakhs of shoes. We grew 7x in like 3 months. It was mind-boggling. And that became like real money. Till 10 lakhs, it's coming and going, it's 20, 30,000 rupees a day. Like, okay, this is interesting. But then 70 lakhs in a month was like, oh, this is real. And that went from 70 lakhs to like 5 crores a month, and we saw like astronomical growth in that market, and then the crash from it, in and out. So I think we sort of saw this whole journey, okay, this can be a large business. That resale industry kind of had a crash. We saw that evolve. We spent a couple years trying to figure the next phase there. We raised some money. That was the next big moment. We raised like a $2 million seed round from some marquee investors, from some high quality founders of large organizations that I've always looked up to. So it was a very excitable journey, and there was many moments where we were like, okay, this can be a big sort of organization one day. And I think we're on the cusp of sort of finding the next inflection point for it.
Right. What I find interesting is that, most people your age would perhaps be in college, studying new subjects or giving exams while you were negotiating deals with maybe senior executives. Did anybody underestimate you just based on your age and because you were young and in the industry?
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of young people who carry their age on their sleeve like a badge of honor and like pride, and I find it extremely distasteful because, look, this would make sense up until maybe even 100 years ago when information was highly asymmetric in access. You had to get to college to reach a library, to reach a book, to learn about something that somebody somewhere wrote and researched, right? That changed dramatically with the advent of the internet and that becoming more and more accessible. And in India with what I think we refer to as the geo generation of internet users. Information is so democratized today, you have no reason not to do it other than just, oh, this is how it's normally done. So I sort of never really viewed my age as, I hated it in fact, because hearing it all the time would kind of give you this comfort that, oh, you have the space. And somewhere I feel like I probably lost a couple years because I was comfortable thinking I'm younger. And so I'm a little frustrated about that now, but we're working on it.
You're still very young. In entrepreneurship, when you look at on social media, on Instagram, it sounds very interesting and exciting, but in real life, it can get very messy as well. And you've also been through a difficult phase. So talk to us about that. How did you take that?
Yeah, I think, so right after we raised this massive, I think many times we've had these bad timing moments now that I look at it. But yeah, we just raised like our $2 million seed round, and we had very abrasively done like a celebration. And there was a bunch of celebrities there, and all of Bombay was celebrating. It was all over the internet. And like, we had just scaled from, I think, 1.5 crore a month to 5 crores a month in like a 3-4 month period. This is 2023. And then the resale market kind of took a crash. It was like the revenge of COVID, where Nike had this really the Nike CEO that kind of just got sacked in the lockdown. He adapted to the whole digital strategy, and then as the real world started opening back up, Nike started suffering, and then he got kicked out, and I also lost a lot of the process because this whole hype resale thing kind of took a big tank, and we went from 5 crores back to 2 crores a month in another 3 months, and it was terrifying. Our investors were like, what the hell, you're spending so much money. And I think the most important thing for me at that time was to preserve and maintain my integrity. So I remember sort of just sitting with myself and my team and saying, guys, it's not looking good. It's going to be a bad time. But you know what? Let's do the right thing. Let's take the punches. We take it one day at a time. We'll figure it out. And the next 2 years, it was god awful. You know, we went through hell and back. I maybe made 1,000. Like first time around, raising money was too easy. You know, we were at the top of our game. I was sending out a cold DM. I'd get a reply saying, I'm down to put 25 lakhs. Found a lead investor. Like, it was an 8-minute meeting, I think, to get our lead check of like $1 million. It was too easy. Anybody you want to reach out to be like, yeah, of course, we'd love to participate. And then we were at the bottom of this barrel, and now nobody was willing to help. And you kind of sort of realize, you know, who you're. People kind of, it's a business at the end of the day, right? If you're investing, you want to associate with what's doing well. It felt like betrayal, but then, you know, in retrospect, you realize that it's, at the end of the day, it's a business, no hard feelings to anybody. But we spent that 2 years just figuring it out. I spent, I think, the first 6-8 months trying to raise money and failing miserably at that. I raised a little bit, it was horrible. You know, it was raising just about enough to survive a little bit, and then it's not enough, and you're still in a bad spot. And then I sort of had another inflection moment, looked in the mirror, I was like, you know what, you're a smart guy. You need to make money. You need money, right? Let's make the money. So we looked at our business, and we had a fantastic media division that built out our entire distribution organically using YouTube and Instagram, right? We had sold about 30 crores of shoes in 1 year with 0 rupees of ad spend, all because of our organic spend. So we sort of opened that up as a service in the short term, and I went into becoming, you know, this sort of biz dev executive for a media organization now. And then I was sending out cold DMs to founders saying, "Do you want to build out a YouTube channel? Look, I've done this for mine. We can do this for yours." And I made 1,000 pitches, and we got a bunch of clients, and we started making a lot of profit. And we used that money to then fund the business through a tough time. And at one point, I remember when it was at its absolute worst, I kind of just looked at myself and I was like, dude, I don't know what's going to happen, but something will happen. Like, you know, something is going to come off this. Just stick the course. Like, we'll figure it out. And so we went at it. We'd show up every day. You'd pitch, you know, something that you absolutely hate. I hate agency businesses. I hate agencies with a passion. Because I think there's such a fundamental disconnect. If you're telling me you can build my business, why won't you go build your own? Like, it just doesn't add up to me. You know what I mean? You're telling me I can change your brand and I can, but why don't you do it for yourself? So we kind of picked a service that aligned with our values. That was like, look, we've built this organic YouTube channel for ourselves. We're not an agency. We can't do like a big campaign or anything, but we can build a YouTube channel for you. And we want to build a YouTube channel that we can have a stake in and that we have an interest in building in this community. So we built in wellness, we built in finance, we built in sport, we built in a bunch of different versions that today not only made us a profit, but now we have a sort of foot in like a dozen different media channels that have grown anywhere from 0 to 50K to 0 to 200K into monetizing. And so we have a bunch of media entities there. And then somewhere along the way, I got an email from a VC I had once failed at pitching to, saying, hey, you know, we've been incubating this footwear startup of sorts, and we're working with this guy who wants to build footwear. They're looking for a co-founder. And I said, I'm not really looking to start something. I'm not looking to leave my job. I love my business, but I'm happy to chat. And I took a meeting, and I met this guy named Vedant and Bharat, who's the founder of a company called Lifelong. So Bharat was an angel investor sort of helping Vedant through this process. Vedant wanted to make shoes. And I met them, and so they told me that this VC, Tanglin Ventures, was down to participate some money, and they're, you know, looking for a co-founder. And I thought about it, and I said, look, you know what, I have some ideas in the space, let me think about it. And I sort of thought about, till then my lifestyle was, you know, primarily barefoot. I still live most of my life barefoot. I said, you know, we could make natural movement shoes, and we could build a brand around this. And I thought of a name, and we called it Built. And it was one meeting, and I went back to them saying, this is, I think, what I could do. And, you know, Mainstreet can be a co-founder here. My current organization has the team, has the know-how, has a resource pool. We can be co-founders. And then we went ahead, and we managed to raise a good chunk of cash pre-seed, and we're launching our brand Built Athletics next tomorrow in all its gusto. It's looking really exciting, and it sort of worked out. I think we showed up every day. We, most importantly, like I said, I think maintained our integrity. We sort of leaned into the fire. We took every punch, every slap with a smile on our face as much as we could. And now it feels like it all worked out.
It's time for a quick break here. We'll be back shortly. Stay tuned.
Presented by IDFC First Bank, always you first. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance.
Welcome back to IDFC First Bank presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 14, co-powered by Star Health Insurance. And you're watching highlights from our inaugural Season 14 Springboard here in the city of Mumbai. Vedant, give us a sense of the retail industry today. A lot of young founders watch our show as well. For someone who wants to enter this space, what are perhaps the challenges they should look out for, or some things they should know for sure before entering the industry?
I really don't like the D2C terminology, because it takes what could be a very personal and creative art and sort of shallows it down and monetizes it. I think brand building it's a beautiful sort of exercise. I think it's deeply personal and creative, and I think it really should come from the heart. And we see a lot of businesses today that are almost commodities masquerading as brands. And I think it's very important to understand the sort of distinction, right? If you're a commodity, you're basically playing market dynamics. You're on a tightrope. Is my CAC to LTV ratio appropriate to keep growing? Do I have enough money to fund this? Am I really making enough money? It's a balance. It's a trade. It's a dhanda. You're not really accomplishing brand value. Brand value, the way I look at it, is something that's compounding, where the sale of one product will lead to an irrational relationship of a consumer with this product and this entity. And I was actually writing about this today, and advertising in brand building can be, it's not zero or positive. It can be negative or positive. And what I mean by that is every dollar you spend can become decreasingly effective if you're doing it poorly. And to the flip side, every dollar you spend can become increasingly effective. There's no sort of steady state in advertising. You're either going here or here. And it's very important to be able to understand and distinguish this. In one direction, you're creating brand value as an asset that eventually in large organizations will show up on your balance sheet in the form of goodwill, right? It's sort of an exercise that, if done correctly, accidentally, whatever, doesn't matter. If done well, will pay dividends for the long term, which, in my opinion, the really large outcomes usually have. The Apples and Googles and Nikes and Adidas, and today, we're seeing sort of slightly modern entities, right? If you look at On Running, you look at Hoka, Lululemon, Alo. Of course, these are all in a very specific industry because the industry I'm building in. But there is examples like this across the board. But I feel like if you really understand your why, and you have a reason and a right to exist, and you sort of carry that forward through the organization, you are able to create something that compounds in value. And you're not sort of playing this tightrope walk, which, in my opinion, most times is what leads to sort of crash out. I think that's also something we managed to do right at Mainstreet in creating our digital distribution and our YouTube channel, and this sort of cultural capital that we had formed. It allowed us to sort of stay alive in a time of crisis. It gave us a new lease of life. It allowed us to keep, the lights running. So I generally feel like, and unfortunately in India, because, as many positives as it has, but with the sort of influx of users on the internet, with the geo generation, most brands in India have scaled pricing down. But I don't know if that's achieving brand value. That's still playing into rationality. As long as you're playing rationality, it's a trade. that, hey, for 500 rupees, I will give you this much value. If not me, then there's this competitor doing it for 490 and 480 and so on and so forth. But I need to be able to sell something to somebody today at 500 and tomorrow for 700. And the next day, it needs to beat inflation. My price growth needs to beat inflation in order to create that this customer will associate with me because of what I have built, and they have that irrational attachment to it. And I believe there's a lot of value to be added there. So I feel like there's a lot of that, there's a lot of gray area in that space, especially in India, unfortunately. And, you know, I think the best way to prove these points is to just do it. So that's our big ambition with what we're doing at Built. Hopefully over the next 5 years, if you guys have listened to what I was saying and if it stays with you, you'll see it play out and it'll make sense then.
No, absolutely. Vedant, what keeps you invested in the industry that you are in? You know, in other words, you know, where is the biggest opportunity do you see, you know, for retailers in India today?
I think it's definitely India's consumption decade. Every time I travel, I am reminded, and it is knocked deeper into my brain, that the best country to be in right now is definitely India. Having a young, a fresh sort of consumer class is extremely exciting. There is so much to do here. So I generally feel like across categories, I know beauty is having a moment, health and wellness is having a wonderful moment. It is my favorite trend. It is my favorite status symbol that has come out of the world in the last, say, 2 decades. That today being healthy and being fit is cool. You know, until I think 10, 15 years ago, it was cool to be, you know, working all night and drinking frequently and barely sleeping. But today, 8 hours of sleep is cool. And, you know, wearing a health tracker is cool. You know, it used to be lame. So I'm really excited about the health and wellness category. I really hope for our country to get healthier and fitter. And, you know, what we're doing at Built will hopefully also play a small sort of part in that process. So I generally, to answer your question, Ritwika, I think health and wellness is my favorite category right now. And that's what keeps me really attached to what I am doing. It's something that I love to consume. It's something that I love to engage with. And it's something that I would encourage, you know, as many people in our country across economic strata to sort of engage with in their own regard.
Sure. And well, I think you're doing a fabulous job, and of course, more power to you. But before I let you go, one last question for all the viewers who are watching. If you had to bust one myth, you know, about entrepreneurship for all the young founders who want to start early, who want to start immediately, perhaps, you know, and get into entrepreneurship, what is that, you know, one myth that you would like to bust for them?
I think just the you need experience type of stuff. I think getting experience is the slowest way to actually, like, getting like non-entrepreneurial experience is the slowest way to get any experience in anything. While skills are useful, I think most skills can be taught. What you have inherently special about you is not something that can be taught. So I think it's really important to understand what makes you. You know, Martin Scorsese has a quote that says, I might be paraphrasing, but he says that the most creative is the most personal. And I think it's really important to understand what is most personal to you and your story and your background and your experiences, and to go deep on that and really believe in yourself. As generic as that may sound, I feel like we still don't hear it enough. You know?
Absolutely. Well, great conversation, Vedant. Thank you so much for being on Leaders of Tomorrow.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
With that, it's a wrap on this edition of IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 14, co-powered by Star Health Insurance. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.
Presented by IDFC First Bank, always you first. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance.